Good afternoon. It's great to be here at TEDxFlourCity, and I'm happy to have an opportunity to speak with all of you about what I think the killings of Cecil the lion and Harambe the gorilla should have taught us. June 30th, 2015. American dentist and trophy hunter Walter Palmer, using a crossbow, shoots Cecil, a 13-year-old lion living in the Harambe National Park in Zimbabwe. Cecil is wounded, but not killed. Over the next 40 hours, Palmer and his guides hunt down Cecil to finish the kill. Social media erupts. There are calls for the death of Walter Palmer, the destruction of his business. His home address is given out, and it's suggested he kill himself. May 28th, 2016. A 3-year-old boy at the Cincinnati Zoo manages to climb into the gorilla enclosure. Zookeepers act swiftly and determine that in order to ensure the boy's safety, they have to shoot to kill Harambe, a 17-year-old gorilla. And social media erupts, mourning the loss of Harambe, questioning the zoo's decision, and placing the blame squarely on inattentive, bad parents. For those of us who work in conservation organizations, these events gave us a glimmer of hope that there might be a light cast on the bigger issues related to wildlife. And instead, the social media response made resoundingly clear we are disconnected from nature. We are very comfortable public shaming strangers about what we perceive as poor parenting or the horrors of canned hunting. But as humans, we're not so good at digging a little deeper to discover what is really happening with the issues, and in this case, the issues of what's happening in wildlife. A report from the World Wildlife Federation that just came out a week or two ago suggests that using 1970 as a base, we are on track to lose 2/3 of our wild animal population by the year 2020. So let's talk about Harambe. Hashtag Harambe has taken on a life of its own. 13,000 tweets in just the last month, almost none of which had anything to do with Harambe the gorilla, or the plight of gorillas in Africa, or the role that zoos play in saving gorillas from extinction. There are 100,000 gorillas remaining in Africa. There are 3 species, all considered critically endangered because they have seen a population decline of 80% in just 3 generations. There are 880 mountain gorillas remaining. You know, gorillas and really all animals reside in zoos not to entertain, but to educate. Their real purpose is to connect with our guests, to inspire them to care, to move them to wanting to behave in more sustainable ways for this planet. The mission at the Seneca Park Zoo is simplified to connect, care, conserve. And while we don't yet have gorillas at the Seneca Park Zoo, they are in the plans. And how can you look into the eyes of a gorilla and not feel a connection? And that ought to move you to want to know more about the issues faced by these majestic creatures in Africa. And for gorillas in the Congo, that means being poached for bushmeat. And because they have a low reproductive rate, even a small amount of hunting leads to population decline. Where there's human overpopulation, there's habitat encroachment and habitat destruction. And even though many of these animals live in national parks, those parks themselves are threatened by timber interests and oil exploration. The human story of exploitation of natural resources for our own economic gain is not a new one, and it is universal. And while I have not been to the Congo, I have been to Madagascar. And the story there is really the same. More than 80% of Madagascar is deforested. 103 species of lemur, all endangered due to habitat loss. But how do you look at a villager and ask him to not cut down the trees for timber and fuel, and not turn the forests into rice paddies so he can feed his family? He's living on the equivalent of $2 a day. how can you tell him the life of a lemur is more important than that? We have to stop pointing our fingers over there and start looking at the root causes of mass extinction. And I can promise you it's not canned hunting. So let's talk about Cecil for a minute. The wild of born free, that romantic notion of in the wild, it doesn't exist much outside of our own imaginations. Where lions roam free, they're nuisance animals. They take down livestock that people depend on. Where elephants roam free, they destroy mass amounts of vegetation. And so we create national parks, sanctuaries, preserves, in a way to manage the species, manage populations, and ensure that humans and animals can live together in shared space. And we invite tourists in for safari. And yet, about every 20 minutes, an elephant is poached for its ivory. So by my watch, that's about 51 so far today. At the rate of 96 elephants a day, that's about 35,000 a year. There are just 350,000 African elephants remaining. So if nothing changes at this rate, we're looking at extinction in about 10 years. You know, this leads to a role that zoos plays that I would venture most of you don't know about. Accredited zoos participate in cooperative and collaborative breeding programs that are designed to sustain a species, enough genetic diversity in that species, to sustain the population in conservation care for the next 100 years. This isn't done to perpetuate the existence of zoos. It's to ensure the viability of that species in natural range. So the Seneca Park Zoo participates in more than 30 species survival plans. We've been involved with assisted reproduction for snow leopards, African elephants, polar bears. We've also been involved in reintroducing native species into natural range, such as North American river otter and lake sturgeon. There are more than 30 species that exist today that were once extinct that are now back in natural range, primarily due to the work of zoos, Mexican wolves, golden lion tamarins, the California condor. So let's go back to Seneca Park Zoo and Cecil. Most of the animals that you see in a zoo were born in a zoo. There are rescued and rehabilitated animals that can't be released, but by and large, when you come to the zoo and see an animal, that animal was born in a zoo. However, to ensure enough genetic diversity in a small breeding population, we have to occasionally introduce new genetics. So our lions came here from Africa in 2012. In Africa, they were considered surplus. A national park can only sustain so many lions, and our 3 lions were 3 lions too many. They could have become part of a canned hunt, but instead they came here to participate in a sustainable breeding population, and in fact their offspring have already had offspring. Much of what I've just shared with you was new to me before I came to the zoo. When I took the job at the zoo, I knew only that I was being called to a new life. My father taught me that our job while we're on this planet is to leave the world a better place than we found it. And this job allows me to do that. I am driven by the knowledge that what I do every day saves animals from extinction. And I'm driven by the knowledge that what all of you do every day can save animals or destroy. I'm not asking each of you to leave your lives and take up the cause the way that I did, but I am asking you to take some action, even if that action is only learning more about the real issues. We are disconnected from nature, and so we blame bad parenting and canned hunting, when the truth is we are living in ways that are unsustainable for this planet. And so my job becomes in part reconnecting people with nature, getting dirt under our fingernails so that the dirt under the fingernails nourishes us and inspires us. And maybe with dirt under our fingernails, we're a little less likely to cast aspersions on social media. So what should we have learned from the killings of Cecil and Harambe? I think what we should have learned is that we're living in the midst of a mass extinction caused by human action, and that each one of us has a responsibility and the ability to turn it around. Thank you very much.